There is a particular kind of unglamorous honesty in a machine designed to get shot at for a living. The Sukhoi Su-25 Frogfoot does not pretend to be anything other than what it is: a flying bathtub wrapped around engines and guns, built to fly low, strike hard, and absorb punishment that would tear apart sleeker aircraft. While Western air forces spent the Cold War perfecting beyond visual range missiles and high-altitude precision strikes, the Soviet Union built something fundamentally different. They built an aircraft that assumed the enemy would shoot back, assumed electronic warfare would render sophisticated systems useless, and assumed pilots would need to see their targets with their own eyes while flying through a storm of ground fire. The Frogfoot represents a philosophy of air power that prioritizes survivability over speed, simplicity over sophistication, and brutal effectiveness over elegant engineering. It is an aircraft designed by people who understood that technological superiority means nothing if your aircraft cannot survive long enough to deliver its weapons. The story of the Su-25 begins in the early 1970s, where Soviet planners watched attack helicopters and jet fighters struggle against determined infantry. Their MiG-17 and Su-7 pilots would scream overhead at 500 knots, drop ordnance somewhere near the target, and disappear before assessing the damage. Helicopters could loiter and engage precisely, but they were vulnerable and slow. What the Soviets needed was something that combined the armored protection of a tank with the speed of a jet. The design competition pitted Sukhoi against Ilyushin, with both bureaus proposing heavily armored subsonic attack aircraft. Sukhoi's design centered on a straight-wing layout that prioritized low-speed handling and weapons capacity over aerodynamic efficiency. The prototype looked less like a fighter jet and more like a cargo aircraft with cannons mounted on it. It was ungainly, aesthetically challenged, and absolutely perfect for the mission. The airframe construction of the Su-25 reveals priorities that separate it from nearly every other jet aircraft of its era. The cockpit sits inside a titanium bathtub that weighs approximately 1,000 kilograms, with armor plating ranging from 10 millimeters to 24 millimeters thick. This is armor designed to absorb direct hits from 23 millimeter anti-aircraft cannons and keep flying. The titanium tub protects not just the pilot, but also critical flight control systems, with redundant hydraulic lines separated by armored bulkheads so that a single hit cannot disable the aircraft. The windscreen is 70 millimeter thick composite armor glass capable of stopping 12.7 millimeter rounds, and even the side panels are 44 millimeter thick armored glass. Soviet engineers protected the cockpit like a medieval knight's helmet, heavy and comprehensive. The fuselage uses aluminum alloys and steel, accepting a weight penalty that Western designers would consider unacceptable in exchange for damage tolerance. The Su-25 can sustain hits that would down other aircraft and continue flying through simple redundancy and overbuilding. The wing design reflects a deliberate choice to optimize for low-altitude performance. The straight, high-mounted wing has an area of 33.7 square meters with wing loading of approximately 300 kilograms per square meter at combat weight, giving excellent slow-speed handling but limiting maximum speed to around 950 kilometers per hour. This is not a shortcoming. This is intentional. The Frogfoot was designed to operate at 100 to 200 meters altitude, where its straight wing provides excellent maneuverability. The wing incorporates slats and double-slotted flaps that provide impressive short-field performance, allowing operations from rough forward airstrips. The control surfaces are hydraulically actuated, but can be manually operated if hydraulic systems fail. Another example of design philosophy that assumes damage and plans accordingly. If deep dives into the strategic and technical decisions behind modern fighters interest you, subscribe. There are plenty more aircraft worth examining closely. The power plant selection demonstrates Soviet preference for proven reliability over cutting-edge performance. The aircraft uses two Tumansky R-95SH turbojets, each producing 44.1 kilonewtons of thrust. These are straightforward turbojets derived from engines that powered MiG-21s in the 1960s. The choice was deliberate. Turbojets are simpler, more tolerant of foreign object damage, and easier to maintain than turbofans. They produce more thrust at low altitudes, where the Su-25 operates, and are less likely to flame out when ingesting gun gas or operating in hot, dusty conditions. The engines are mounted high on the fuselage in nacelles that protect them from ground fire and reduce the infrared signature when viewed from below. The air intakes feature deflectors designed to prevent debris ingestion during operations from unprepared airstrips, essential in Afghanistan where dust and stones were constant threats. Each engine is fed by a separate fuel system, and the fuel tanks are protected by polyurethane foam that prevents catastrophic fires if penetrated. The twin-engine configuration provides redundancy that proved its worth in combat. The Su-25 can fly and land on a single engine, and there are documented cases of aircraft returning to base with one engine completely shot away. The fuel capacity of approximately 4,000 liters gives the aircraft a combat radius of around 550 kilometers with a full weapons load, or about 2 hours of loiter time. For a close air support aircraft operating from forward bases, this provides adequate persistence without requiring aerial refueling. The avionics suite of the Su-25 reflects a design philosophy that distrusts technology and trusts pilot skill. The baseline aircraft that entered service in the early 1980s had navigation equipment that would have seemed dated in the 1970s, a gyroscopic artificial horizon, radio compass, and radar altimeter. There was no sophisticated heads-up display, no flight management computer, no terrain-following radar. The weapons delivery system consisted of an ASP-17 optical gun sight, essentially a mechanical computing gun sight requiring the pilot to estimate range and release weapons based on experience. This seems primitive until you consider the environment. Close air support in Soviet doctrine meant flying low enough that terrain-following radar was unnecessary. It meant operating in electromagnetic warfare environments where sophisticated systems would be jammed. It meant delivering weapons from ranges measured in hundreds of meters, where the Mark I eyeball remains the most reliable sensor. The weapons capability of the Frogfoot reveals brutal purpose. The fuselage-mounted GH-32-500 twin-barrel 30mm cannon fires up to 3,000 rounds per minute, with 250 rounds carried internally. This is a weapon for destroying armored vehicles, fortifications, and helicopters. The aircraft has 10 hardpoints capable of carrying up to 4,400 kilograms of ordnance, although typical combat loads ranged from 2,000 to 3,000 kilograms. The Su-25 can carry virtually every type of unguided weapon in the Soviet arsenal: high-explosive bombs, cluster munitions, napalm tanks, rocket pods with 57mm or 80mm unguided rockets, and gun pods for additional firepower. Later variants added guided weapons including laser-guided bombs and anti-tank missiles, but the basic Su-25 was designed around visual aiming at close range. The rocket pods became the weapon of choice for Su-25 pilots in combat. The B-8M20 tube rocket pod fires 80mm S-8 rockets with high explosive, fragmentation, or penetrator warheads. A single Su-25 could carry up to 240 rockets, and the sight of a Frogfoot ripple-firing rockets was reportedly terrifying from the receiving end. The rockets are not precision weapons. Dispersion can be measured in tens of meters. But for suppressing enemy positions or destroying soft targets, they proved devastatingly effective. The weapons mix reflects Soviet tactical doctrine: saturate the target area with overwhelming firepower and rely on volume of fire to achieve effects rather than precision guidance. The landing gear design demonstrates rugged simplicity. The gear is robust enough to handle operations from damaged runways, grass strips, and compacted dirt fields. The main gear uses low-pressure tires that distribute weight and reduce ground pressure, essential for operations from soft surfaces. Soviet war plans assumed NATO would target airfields early, forcing attack aircraft to operate from highways, farm fields, and any flat surface long enough to get a jet airborne. The Su-25 was designed to operate from these improvised strips, and the landing gear had to be robust enough to handle the abuse while being simple enough for conscript mechanics to maintain with basic tools. The flight characteristics of the Su-25 earn respect from pilots who have flown it. The aircraft is stable, predictable, and honest. It does not have the power for impressive vertical maneuvers or wing loading for high G turns, but it handles smoothly throughout its flight envelope. Pilots report that the controls are heavy by Western standards, requiring physical effort to maneuver at combat speeds, but this heaviness prevents over-controlling and provides natural damping during weapons delivery runs. Approach and landing speeds are reasonable at around 230 kilometers per hour, and the aircraft is stable in the landing configuration even in gusty crosswinds. Visibility from the cockpit is excellent forward and to the sides, adequate downward, and poor to the rear, which is acceptable for an attack aircraft that should not be looking behind it during a gun run anyway. The survivability features extend far beyond the armored cockpit. The aircraft has an inert gas fire suppression system that floods fuel tanks and engine bays with nitrogen if fire is detected. The fuel system uses foam-filled tanks that cannot produce explosive fuel-air mixtures even if penetrated. Critical hydraulic and electrical lines are separated and armored so that a single hit cannot disable multiple systems. The aircraft has 3 independent hydraulic systems, and flight control is possible even if 2 of the 3 are destroyed. There are documented cases of Su-25s returning to base with extensive damage to control systems, hydraulics shot away, and fuel leaking from multiple holes. The aircraft kept flying because it was designed to absorb damage and continue functioning. The operational debut of the Su-25 in Afghanistan revealed both strengths and limitations. Soviet forces began receiving the aircraft in 1981, and it quickly became the preferred platform for close air support missions in mountainous terrain. The Frogfoot could carry heavy weapons loads into high-altitude airfields, loiter over the battlefield longer than fighters, and absorb the ground fire that was inevitable when attacking Mujahideen positions in narrow valleys. Pilots learned to exploit the aircraft's strengths, flying low enough that shoulder-fired missiles had minimal time to lock on, using terrain to mask their approach, and delivering weapons from steep diving attacks. The armor proved its worth repeatedly, with aircraft returning from missions with holes from small arms fire, shrapnel damage from anti-aircraft artillery, and direct hits from heavy machine guns. However, Afghanistan also exposed the Frogfoot's limits when facing determined air defense. The Mujahideen received Stinger shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles in 1986, and the tactical situation changed overnight. Soviet Su-25 units adapted by flying higher, using flares and chaff more aggressively, and modifying tactics to reduce exposure time. The loss rate increased but remained sustainable, and the aircraft continued to prove more survivable than faster, lighter attack aircraft. The combat experience validated the fundamental design philosophy. The Frogfoot was not invulnerable, but it was tough enough to complete missions and bring pilots home. Given its combat record and the costs involved, was this strategic bet justified? The Soviets built a slow, heavily armored aircraft in an era when Western air forces emphasized speed and technology. Knowing what you now know about its performance in Afghanistan and later conflicts, do you think the Soviet approach was vindicated, or should they have invested in more sophisticated platforms? Let me know what you think in the comments. The comparison between the Su-25 and its Western counterpart, the Fairchild A-10 Thunderbolt II, reveals parallel evolution towards similar solutions. Both aircraft emerged from similar requirements: survive in hostile air defense environments, deliver heavy weapons loads, and provide effective close air support. The A-10 is larger and carries more weapons, making it better suited for extended loitering. The Su-25 is smaller, more agile at low speeds, and better suited for operations from austere airfields. Both aircraft use titanium armor around the cockpit, redundant flight control systems, and separated engines to enhance survivability. The key difference lies in operational doctrine. The A-10 was designed to operate with extensive support infrastructure and sophisticated air defenses protecting friendly forces. The Su-25 was designed to operate with minimal support infrastructure in contested airspace, with the assumption that sophisticated systems would be degraded by jamming or broken by hard use. The Frogfoot's export success and operational longevity speak to the soundness of its fundamental design. Beyond Soviet and Russian air forces, the aircraft serves with approximately 15 countries and has seen combat in conflicts ranging from the Iran-Iraq War to the Syrian Civil War. Iraqi and Iranian Su-25's flew ground attack missions on opposite sides of the same conflict. The aircraft saw extensive service in African conflicts, particularly in Ethiopia and Angola, where its ability to operate from rough airstrips and survive battle damage proved more valuable than sophisticated avionics. More recently, Russian Su-25s have been active in both Chechnya and Syria, continuing to provide close air support despite being designed nearly 50 years ago. The modernization efforts applied to the Su-25 reveal which aspects can be improved and which are fundamental limitations. The Su-25T variant introduced upgraded avionics, including a ballistic computer, laser rangefinder, and improved navigation systems, transforming weapons delivery accuracy. The Su-25TM added compatibility with guided weapons, including laser-guided bombs and anti-tank missiles. The Su-25 SM-39, the most recent upgrade, incorporates modern glass cockpit displays, satellite navigation, and sophisticated targeting pods that enable precision weapons delivery from standoff ranges. These upgrades address the aircraft's most significant limitation, its original lack of precision attack capability. However, certain limitations cannot be upgraded away. The aircraft will never be fast. Its straight wing and subsonic engines limit it to speeds well below modern fighters. It will never have long range. The internal fuel capacity and inefficient engines limit radius of action. It will never be truly effective in contested airspace against modern surface-to-air missile systems. No amount of armor will protect against proximity-fused missiles with sophisticated guidance systems. The question of whether the Su-25 remains relevant in contemporary warfare depends heavily on the nature of the conflict. Against a peer adversary with integrated air defenses, modern fighters, and sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, the Frogfoot would be dangerously vulnerable. Its lack of speed prevents rapid egress from threatened areas, its limited countermeasures cannot defeat modern missiles, and its lack of stealth makes it easily detectable. However, in asymmetric conflicts against insurgent forces or adversaries without sophisticated air defenses, the Su-25 remains devastatingly effective. Its ability to carry heavy weapons loads, loiter over the battlefield, deliver precise strikes with modern targeting systems, and absorb battle damage makes it ideal for counterinsurgency operations. The low operating costs compared to modern multi-role fighters make it economically sustainable for extended campaigns. In these contexts, the same characteristics that made the aircraft successful in Afghanistan remain relevant today. The pilot's perspective on the Su-25 tends toward pragmatic respect. It is not an aircraft that inspires poetry, but it is an aircraft that pilots trust to bring them home. The cockpit is cramped by modern standards, but the armor provides psychological reassurance when flying into hostile fire. The flight characteristics are stable and predictable, which proves valuable when concentrating on target acquisition and weapons delivery while dodging ground fire. The weapons delivery systems, even in upgraded variants, require more pilot input than automated Western systems, but this keeps the pilot actively engaged in the attack process. The visibility from the cockpit enables visual target identification and assessment, critical for avoiding fratricide and collateral damage. The aircraft's reputation for survivability generates confidence. Pilots know that the Frogfoot can take hits that would down other aircraft and keep flying. The maintenance perspective reveals practical advantages of simple, robust design. The Su-25 does not require sophisticated test equipment or specialized tools for routine maintenance. Engine changes can be accomplished in field conditions. The straightforward system's design means that failures are usually obvious and repairs are straightforward. The aircraft tolerates rough handling better than more sophisticated platforms. These characteristics make it suitable for air forces with limited technical infrastructure, which explains part of its export success. The Frogfoot's combat record provides the ultimate test of its design philosophy. The aircraft has been shot down in combat numerous times, but loss rates have consistently been lower than faster, less protected aircraft operating in similar environments. In Afghanistan, the Su-25 loss rate was approximately 1 aircraft per 1,000 sorties, significantly lower than loss rates for MiG-23s and Su-17 fighters performing similar missions. In the Russia-Georgia War of 2008, Georgian forces shot down several Russian Su-25s with shoulder-fired missiles, but the aircraft continued to fly close air support missions throughout the brief conflict. These combat results validate the fundamental design concept. The aircraft will take losses, but it will survive at higher rates than alternatives and continue to accomplish its mission. The geopolitical implications of the Su-25 extend beyond its direct military capabilities. The aircraft represents an affordable entry into meaningful air power for countries that cannot afford sophisticated multi-role fighters. A nation can operate a fleet of Frogfoots with less infrastructure and support than required for modern fighters, yet still possess effective close air support capabilities. This has influenced regional power dynamics in several conflicts, enabling smaller nations to project air power. The aircraft also represents a philosophical statement about the nature of air power, that survivability and simplicity can be more valuable than speed and sophistication, at least in certain contexts. This philosophy challenges the Western tendency toward ever more capable and complex aircraft, raising questions about whether the pursuit of technological superiority has sometimes led to platforms that are too expensive or too complex for many real-world missions. The legacy of the Su-25 influences contemporary aircraft design more than might be apparent. The reemergence of interest in light attack aircraft in Western air forces reflects recognition of the same principles that drove the Frogfoot's design. Not every mission requires a supersonic multi-role fighter. The success of aircraft like the Brazilian Super Tucano in counterinsurgency roles validates the principle that the appropriate aircraft depends on the threat environment and mission requirements. The Frogfoot demonstrated that an aircraft does not need to be sophisticated to be effective. The comparison between the Su-25 and modern drones raises interesting questions about the future of close air support. Unmanned aircraft can loiter longer, take more risks, and do not endanger pilots. However, drones remain vulnerable to electronic warfare, dependent on communication links that can be jammed, and limited in their ability to make complex tactical decisions in fluid ground combat situations. The Su-25 does not depend on satellite links or vulnerable communication systems. The pilot in the cockpit can see the battlefield, make immediate tactical decisions, and adapt to changing situations without waiting for authorization from remote operators. The aircraft can continue to operate even if all sophisticated systems fail, falling back to basic visual navigation and unguided weapons delivery. This independence may prove increasingly valuable in future conflicts, where electronic warfare and cyber attacks are primary tactics. The Frogfoot's continuing production, more than 40 years after the first prototype flew, testifies to the enduring validity of its core design. The aircraft being produced today bears little resemblance to the original Su-25 in terms of avionics and weapons capability, but the fundamental airframe and design philosophy remain unchanged. This longevity suggests that the designers at Sukhoi correctly identified the essential requirements for a close air support aircraft. The fact that no true replacement has emerged indicates that designing a better close air support aircraft is harder than it appears. The competing requirements of survivability, payload, loiter time, accuracy, and affordability continue to drive designers toward solutions that closely resemble the Su-25. If you found this analysis useful, a like helps more people discover these deep dives. Thanks for watching. The ultimate assessment of the Su-25 must acknowledge both its achievements and limitations. It achieved its primary design goal, creating an aircraft that could survive in hostile air defense environments and deliver effective close air support. It demonstrated that armor, redundancy, and simplicity could compensate for lack of speed and sophisticated systems in many operational contexts. It influenced close air support doctrine and aircraft design across multiple nations and continues to serve effectively in conflicts where its strengths align with mission requirements. However, it also represents compromises that limit its applicability. The heavy armor and straight wing limit speed and range. The design is fundamentally unsuited for operations in airspace contested by modern fighters or sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems. The Frogfoot endures because it solves a specific problem effectively and affordably. That problem, providing close air support to ground forces in contested environments with limited infrastructure, remains relevant across numerous conflicts. The aircraft may not be glamorous, fast, or sophisticated, but it accomplishes its mission and brings pilots home, and those fundamental virtues ensure its continued relevance despite the passage of decades. The Su-25 represents a philosophy of military aviation that prioritizes effectiveness over elegance, survivability over performance, and pragmatism over technological showmanship. Whether that philosophy is correct depends on context, but the aircraft's long service and combat success suggests that sometimes the unglamorous answer is the right answer. In an era of hypersonic missiles and fifth-generation stealth fighters, there remains a place for an armored bathtub with engines, and that place is down in the weeds where the shooting happens and survival matters more than speed.